Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into something pretty heavy, actually. Yeah, we're going to be looking into the mind of a mass shooter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Specifically, we're going to be looking into the events that led up to the tragedy in Aurora back in 2012. You remember that, right?
Yeah, vaguely.
It was the midnight premiere of The Dark Knight Rises,
Oh, yeah.
and a gunman opened fire.
Tragic.
Yeah, killing 12 people and injuring 70 others. So we're not here to sensationalize anything, but we're just trying to understand, what could lead to something like this.
Yeah, for sure.
And to guide us in this exploration, we'll be using court documents and some psychological analyses of the shooter, James Holmes.
Okay.
So to start off, I think one of the most perplexing aspects of this whole case is the contrast between who Holmes was before the shooting and the horror that he unleashed.
Yeah.
Like, this wasn't some troubled kid or something,
No.
He was actually a very promising student.
Oh.
Yeah, he excelled in the sciences and was even pursuing a neuroscience PhD.
Wow. So how does someone with so much potential go on to commit such a horrific act?
Right. It's almost like, was there some kind of turning point? Or was this darkness just hidden all along? Like under the surface.
Hmm.
The sources we've looked at seem to suggest that it wasn't like a sudden snap. It was more of a slow, steady kind of deterioration.
Hmm.
And one of the things that they point to is this increasing social isolation. Like he was withdrawing from interactions despite, all this academic success that he was having.
Interesting.
So I'm curious, do you think that that isolation was a symptom of his declining mental state, or did it actually, contribute to it?
That's a really good question.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes you think about the complex kind of interplay of factors that we have here. Isolation can be both a symptom and a cause.
Hmm.
Think about it like this. When we're socially connected, right, we're constantly receiving feedback from other people.
Yeah.
And that feedback helps to regulate our emotions, behaviors, and it helps us to develop empathy and, sense of belonging. But when we're isolated, right, our thoughts and feelings, they kind of spiral inwards, and then they become distorted and amplified.
Oh, yeah.
It's like being in an echo chamber. All of that negativity just kind of festers.
Yeah. An echo chamber. Yeah, that's a really powerful way to put it. And from what we've been able to gather from the sources, Holmes was struggling with pretty severe depression and paranoia.
Hmm.
And actually, he was seeking professional help from a psychiatrist at the time.
Oh, wow.
But even with treatment, his condition continued to worsen, and his thoughts really became consumed by violent fantasies.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is. And I think here's where we see a really chilling shift, right? It's not just mental illness anymore, but it's this transformation in his thinking. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The sources describe how meticulous his planning was. Over several months, he actually legally obtained this frightening arsenal. It's insane.
What do you mean? Like what kind of weapons?
So it included a Smith & Wesson M&P 15 assault rifle, a Remington 870 Express tactical 12-gauge shotgun, a Glock 20 10-millimeter handgun, and over 6,000 rounds of ammunition.
It's, yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that he could, legally obtain all of this firepower, it raises a lot of questions.
Of course.
A whole other can of worms,
Yeah.
honestly. I mean, it's terrifying to think about, especially when you consider just the level of premeditation involved. He specifically targeted that crowded movie theater,
Mhm.
a midnight premiere of this highly anticipated film. It seems like he was really aiming for maximum casualties.
Yeah.
He even wore tactical gear, like a ballistic helmet, gas mask, and a throat protector. This wasn't just a random act of violence. This was calculated.
Yeah.
This was meticulously planned, And then on that fateful night, Holmes's meticulously crafted plan just unfolded, basically.
Yeah.
I don't really want to dwell on the violence itself, but I think it is important to just understand the impact. The sources describe Holmes entering the theater, releasing these tear gas canisters, and then just opening fire indiscriminately.
Oh, gosh.
The youngest victim was only 6 years old,
Oh, wow.
and the oldest was 51. This wasn't an attack against specific individuals.
Mm.
This was a horrific act of random violence, a tragedy that really could have impacted anyone in that theater.
Right.
And I think the randomness of it all just makes it that much more difficult to comprehend,
Yeah.
And it raises this critical question of well, what was the motive?
Right.
Was this solely driven by mental illness? Holmes's defense argued that he suffered from schizophrenia,
Okay.
a very severe mental disorder that can distort reality, cause delusions and hallucinations. And, it makes it really, really difficult to distinguish right from wrong.
Mm.
So if schizophrenia was, a factor, could he even control his actions?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Because the sources paint a picture of someone who was very deeply troubled, but also, like, disturbingly methodical in his planning.
yeah, that's where it gets really complicated. I mean, while acknowledging his, mental health struggles, the prosecution argued that Holmes was in fact aware of his actions
Mm.
and, that he was capable of making choices,
Mm-hmm.
even if those choices were driven by a distorted sense of reality. And I think this raises a really important point. Mental illness can be a contributing factor to violence, but it's very rarely the whole story.
Yeah, for sure. It's clear that this case is way more complex than just like a simple explanation, right?
Definitely.
We've got the mental health aspect, the meticulous planning, and this access to a frightening amount of firepower. Are there any other factors that you think we need to explore to really understand this tragedy?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there are. Like, there's a lot more to uncover here. And as we kind of dig deeper, we start to see some really um, disturbing patterns emerge.
Yeah.
Patterns that, unfortunately, we see in other cases of mass violence as well.
Okay, so let's talk about some of these patterns then. I mean, we've talked about Holmes's mental health struggles,
Yeah.
but what else was going on in his life, leading up to this?
Right. So the court documents and the psychological analyses, they all point to something that's become tragically familiar in these types of cases, and that is social isolation.
Right, that echo chamber we talked about.
Exactly, yeah. And, the sources really paint this picture of Holmes as increasingly withdrawn, very, very few close relationships. And he's drifting further and further away from any meaningful connections. And this isolation, it can really create a breeding ground for resentment, anger, and just this distorted worldview.
Yeah, it's almost like a vicious cycle, right? The more isolated someone becomes, the more their negative thoughts and feelings just kind of fester and grow. And then that pushes them further away from, the support that they actually might need.
Exactly.
I don't know. Have you ever felt like completely misunderstood?
Oh, yeah.
And now I imagine that feeling just like magnified 1,000-fold, right?
Mhm.
Coupled with this lack of healthy coping mechanisms.
Right. That's a powerful way to put it. And it highlights, just how crucial social connection really is for our mental well-being and our emotional well-being. Like, we need those bonds.
Yeah.
We need that sense of belonging to help us navigate, the challenges of life. And without it, it's just so easy to fall into despair.
Yeah.
And to start seeing the world through this lens of anger and resentment.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of brings us to another really disturbing element of this whole case, and that's the desire for infamy.
Right.
Like, Holmes chose such a high-profile target,
Yeah.
a movie premiere, a place that was, guaranteed to be in the news.
Right.
It's almost as if he was seeking like a twisted form of legacy,
Yeah.
a way to make his mark on the world, even if it was through violence.
It's a chilling thought, but I think it's something that, we need to confront.
Mm-hmm.
Because this desire for infamy, it's not unique to Holmes. We've seen it in other cases of mass violence.
Mm-hmm.
This craving for notoriety,
Mm-hmm.
this craving for recognition, however perverse it may be.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? In today's world, it's even more potent because we're hyper-connected.
Right.
Social media amplifies everything.
It's crazy, right? Like how our deep dive started with, just this focus on one individual and his actions. And now we're talking about like these broader societal issues like social isolation, the whole allure of infamy in the age of social media. It's almost like we're zooming out from a single pixel to see the whole picture.
Yeah. That's a great analogy. And it highlights that, we can't fully understand the actions of an individual like Holmes without considering the context in which those actions take place.
Right.
I mean, societal influences, cultural narrative, they all play a role.
So let's talk about some of the broader kind of societal questions that this case brings up then.
Okay.
Especially the issue of gun control. Like the fact that Holmes was able to legally obtain, an assault rifle, a shotgun, a handgun, and thousands of rounds of ammunition, despite, his documented mental health struggles, it's deeply disturbing.
Yeah.
Would stricter gun laws have prevented this tragedy? Like, could there have been red flags that might have stopped him from acquiring those weapons?
Those are really tough questions. I mean, those are questions that continue to be debated, and there's no easy answer. But it is clear that, the ease with which someone like Holmes could amass, such a deadly arsenal raises some very, very serious concerns. And I think we need to consider, what steps we can take as a society to make it more difficult for individuals who pose a threat to themselves or others to obtain firearms.
Yeah, and then on the flip side of that, there's the whole question of mental health care.
Right.
Like, Holmes was seeing a psychiatrist, but his condition, continued to deteriorate.
Mhm.
Could earlier intervention, could more comprehensive treatment have made a difference?
That's another really, really crucial point.
Mhm.
Access to quality mental health care is just vital.
Yeah.
And we need to, invest in resources, improve training for professionals,
Yeah.
and work to destigmatize seeking help.
Yeah.
Because someone is struggling, reaching out for support should be seen as a sign of strength, not weakness.
Right. It's not just about individual responsibility either.
No.
It's about creating a society that prioritizes mental well-being. You
Yeah.
know? A society that recognizes that mental health is just as important as physical health.
Absolutely. I mean, we need to move beyond this mindset of simply reacting to tragedies like the Aurora shooting.
Yeah.
We need to be proactive.
Mhm.
We need to be focusing on prevention and early intervention. And that requires a collective effort. Individuals, communities, policymakers,
Yeah.
everyone working together to create a more supportive and a more resilient society.
As we've been discussing all of this, it's hard not to feel a sense of like dread almost, knowing that all of these issues, the mental health, social isolation, access to weapons, the desire for infamy, it's all interconnected.
It is very heavy stuff.
Yeah, it really is. And it contributes to this larger, more complex problem.
It's understandable to feel that way, but we can't let that complexity paralyze us. We need to acknowledge the interconnectedness of these issues. We need to see the bigger picture if we really want to find any meaningful solutions.
Okay, so where do we even begin to address these deeply rooted, like multifaceted problems then? I mean, it feels almost too big to grasp, too overwhelming to tackle.
It is a daunting task, but
Okay.
it doesn't have to be solely on like this grand scale. I mean, while we advocate for systemic change, we could also start with ourselves.
Okay.
We can start with our own awareness and our own actions. Remember, even small acts of kindness and connection, they can have a ripple effect.
So you're saying that we as individuals can actually make a difference.
Absolutely. And that's what we're going to explore in more detail, when we come back. We're going to delve into some practical steps that we can all take to be more aware, more compassionate, and more engaged in creating a society that prioritizes mental well-being and fosters genuine connection.
We're back, and I don't know about you, but after all that talk about, societal issues and the complexity of mass shootings, I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed.
I hear you. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah. So where do we even begin to address these deeply rooted problems? It feels like we're trying to untangle like this giant knot.
Well, remember, even the most complex problems can be broken down into smaller pieces, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to solve everything all at once.
Right.
We can start by focusing on, what we can control,
Okay, yeah.
the actions we can take in our own lives and our communities.
Okay, that makes sense. But what does that look like in practice? I mean, what can we as individuals actually do to make a difference? It's easy to feel kind of helpless,
Yeah, for sure. Well, think back to what we were discussing about Holmes's increasing isolation and withdrawal. We could all be more attuned to those signs in the people around us. Maybe it's a friend who's become unusually quiet, or a family member who's isolating themselves, or a coworker who's, expressing feelings of hopelessness or anger. These could be signs that someone is struggling,
Right.
and they need support.
So it's about like noticing those red flags, those subtle kind of shifts in behavior. But what do we do once we've noticed them?
Right.
It's one thing to be aware, but it's another to like actually know how to help.
Right. And sometimes the simplest actions can be the most powerful.
Yeah.
Just reaching out to someone, expressing genuine concern, and letting them know that you care. It can make a world of difference.
Yeah.
Could be a simple check-in,
Yeah.
a text message,
Yeah.
or an invitation to connect, even if it's just for like a walk or a cup of coffee.
I've definitely been there, feeling isolated, feeling alone. And I remember how much it meant when a friend reached out just to ask how I was doing.
Yeah.
It reminded me that, I wasn't invisible, that someone cared.
Yep.
And sometimes that's all it takes to break through that feeling of isolation.
Exactly. Human connection is a powerful antidote to isolation and despair.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're, concerned about someone's mental health, don't hesitate to encourage them to seek professional help. There's still a stigma around mental illness, but we need to break that down. Seeking help is a sign of strength, not weakness.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of seeking help, it's important to remember that, we as individuals, we can't be therapists for everyone, right? We
No.
can offer support and a listening ear, but if someone is struggling with serious mental health issues, they really need professional guidance.
Absolutely. And that's where, advocating for better mental health care comes in. We need to push for greater access to affordable, quality mental health services. This is a systemic issue that requires systemic solutions. We can contact our elected officials, support organizations that are, working to improve mental health care, and just raise awareness about the importance of mental well-being in our communities.
Yeah, it's interesting how our deep dive started with, this focus on one individual, on one horrific act.
Right.
But as we've explored the factors that contributed to the Aurora shooting, our conversation has expanded to encompass these much larger societal challenges. It's a reminder that individual actions are important,
Yes.
but they need to be coupled with systemic change as well.
Absolutely. The Aurora shooting, like all mass shootings, was a tragedy on multiple levels. It's
Mm-hmm.
a reminder of the fragility of the human mind, the consequences of societal neglect, and the urgent need for change. We can honor the victims and work to prevent future tragedies by addressing those root causes of violence, by fostering a culture of empathy and understanding,
Mm-hmm.
and by creating a society that prioritizes mental well-being.
That's a really powerful message, and it gives me hope that we can actually make a difference. If there's one thing that our listeners take away from this deep dive, what should it be?
I think it's this. Understanding is the first step towards creating meaningful change. We can't afford to simplify or to look for easy answers. You know, Mass shootings are a symptom of a deeper societal malaise, and addressing that malaise requires a multifaceted approach: individual awareness, community support, and systemic change. It's a long road, but it's a journey that we have to take together.
Well said. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the mind of a mass shooter. It's been a heavy one, but I hope that our listeners leave feeling not just informed, but also empowered. Empowered to be more aware, more compassionate, and more engaged in creating a world where tragedies like the Aurora shooting become less likely. And it's not just a talking point, but a turning point. Thanks for joining us on this journey.